Hello, today is the 20th. No, not the 20th, the 10th. Oh dear, this is a good start, isn't it? The 10th of October, 2025. I have something I think is new for you. You might not have heard of Leonardo Castellani. He's an Argentinian priest. He died in 1981. These Argentinian priests in the mid-20th century, his name is Leonardo Castellani, wrote a small but piercing book entitled Christ and the Pharisees. It's not a commentary on the Gospels. It is a diagnosis of religion itself when it forgets God and becomes an idol of its own making. He was a Jesuit, a true Jesuit of the old type, not a neo-Jesuit. He was a philosopher, he was a theologian, a novelist. His works have not been translated, so I just want to introduce him to you because he wrote tales, he wrote just about everything, and I'm going to continue to talk a little bit more about him. I will put whatever videos I post, I will put them on the members only. All right, but this is an introduction to his work. So he was a philosopher, he was a theologian, a novelist, prolific writer, and one of the church's most uncomfortable prophets. He once said that the Pharisee is not the unbeliever, he is the believer gone wrong. He is the believer inverted. In Christ and the Pharisees, Castellani asks a very disturbing question. What happens when faith decays, not into atheism, but into hypocrisy, and then even, he's going to show you, and then even hatred, absolute loathing for those who believe. That is how he describes the Pharisee. The Pharisee in all of us is going to talk about priests and, the hierarchy in the church too. But as an example, but all of us. He saw that danger, not just in the church or not just even outside the church, but within the church and within ourselves. As I'm reading it, I remember Dostoevsky. I will not go into Dostoevsky because I have talked about how he, in The House of the Dead, how he talked about power, how it increases and changes the individual. But like Dostoevsky, Castellani believed that evil often wears the mask of virtue. The mask of virtue. In other words, it's not coming as an enemy with horns to punch you on the nose, but he comes from behind. It's about deceit. In The House of the Dead, Dostoevsky describes very well the moral corruption of those in power. Especially how when you give power to a weak man specifically, once you give him power and control, that weak man becomes the cruelest jailer. Castellani saw something similar in religion, that when belief or faith loses love, it becomes the tyranny of the soul. And he has this, like a staircase, as it were, of sometimes, this is a collection of sermons and essays and things, but sometimes it's 7, sometimes it's 8. But this descent, if you can see sort of a fall, a staircase or a chain, this spiritual descent, descending. I'm not sure whether I'm pronouncing it correctly. I don't want to mean descent, I mean descent. Okay. He calls it the degrees of Phariseism, or the Pharisaical disease. Is the slow transformation of faith into something hollow and finally into hatred for those who believe. And the steps go something like this. First of all, let's imagine, as I said, it's for all of us and it's for the church, but let's imagine, so we can see it, we can visualize it, a priest, let's say, okay? A priest that he's beginning to lose his faith. And having lost his faith, he doesn't leave. He doesn't say, "I lost my faith. I can no longer do this," for whatever reason. Yeah, but continues there. So let's put a priest, a bad priest, as an example for all of us and for the church. Right? So first of all, then religion becomes something external. It becomes just a show of piety. The words remain. The heart is gone. Okay, but he stays there. And that, therefore, all the ritual, everything turns into a routine, mechanical repetition of rites and rules. He doesn't believe in it anymore. And after that, the step number 3, as it were, is like he begins to see his priestly office not as a vocation, but as a career or a profession, a means of comfort, stability, a job. It's a job. Yeah, so he doesn't leave. Now it's a job. We can all see, even, we're talking about priests here, but we can all see a priest who has a vocation and a priest who's there, in a career ladder, as it were. We can see them miles away, right? So step number 3, it becomes a profession, a career. And that profession and career then turns into a business, as it were. By business, meaning a network of influence, reputation, profit. He's gaining from his position. He is gaining from his office. And that is going to continue to degenerate. Remember Dostoevsky, it's going to continue to degenerate and now becomes power. Power, now the urge to dominate, the urge to control others. He keeps using in God's name, as it were, in the name of religion. But really now he enjoys that control. And since he is enjoying that control, then that will become contempt. Contempt. Contempt for those who are faithful and sincere. A quiet, still quiet hatred of those who still believe. Contempt. Looking down on them. This is all, of course, inside of himself, yes, but the contempt is there. And then finally he says persecution. Not an actual persecution, but when these false believer actually turns against the true one. It turns into loathing, it turns into hatred, and if he could make him disappear, as it were, he would, if he could. Castellani writes that the final form of Phariseism is not disbelief, is the hatred of belief itself. In the case of a priest, the priest who cannot stand the believer, the true believer, because the believer reminds him of what he has lost. We're talking about Pharisees, the New Testament, you remember? Well, that same Pharisee in the priest now, or in us, hating, feeling contempt for that one who truly believes. So the Pharisee is not an atheist, he's saying. He's not someone who doesn't believe. If he doesn't believe, he doesn't believe. He doesn't care about you believing. It's the believer who has lost it, and now instead of looking into himself and saying what has happened to me and repentance and all that, begins to hate the believer. The Pharisee, Castellani says, kills the saint, the moral person, believing that he's serving God. He makes himself believe that he is serving God. Castellani's vision is harsh, but it is not cynical. He believed that even the church's corruption can be redeemed because Christ always rises within it again and again and again. We have seen it through the history of the church. Yes, there always has to be a process of after deterioration and degeneration, a cyclical thing where it is redeemed again and rises again. Yet his warning is timeless. Every institution, every creed, every human being who begins with truth and sincerity can end up there, can end up in hypocrisy and loathing and hatred and persecution. Like Dostoevsky, Castellani saw that the line dividing good and evil runs through every human heart, even the heart of the religious. The Pharisee, he wrote, is the believer who has lost the love of God and kept the shell of religion. It's unfortunate. He wrote in Spanish and he has almost never been translated. But his words speak across language and time, a call to purify the faith, not by renouncing it, but by reforming it to its source, humility and love. Okay, so let me go into a little bit more detail. As I said, of this staircase of doom, as it were. It's not merely theology, it's a mirror held up to the church and to each one of us, to the soul of every believer. Some quotes here from him. The Pharisee is the believer who has lost the love of God and kept only the shell of religion. He never attacked the faith. Let us be very clear about that. He attacked its corruption. To him, the Pharisee was not an unbeliever. He was the religious man gone wrong, inverted. And he saw that, like Dostoevsky, as I said, that power, even moral power, tempts man to cruelty. Power tempts man to cruelty. And that the worst type of cruelty often hides behind good intentions. He said, "Nothing is more dangerous than a religion without love. For he who does not love hates, ends up hating, and he who hates in God's name kills." So this degeneration, a kind of spiritual entropy, he called Phariseism. Phariseism is the corruption of true religion, not its denial, not the denial of religion, but its caricature. So he sees, to go into greater detail, step number 1, loses faith, so it becomes exhibition. Religion becomes an outward show, a theater of piety. Exhibition. Number 2, routine. It becomes a habit, a profession, a career. 3, business, a source of gain. 4th, power, then into an instrument of domination, that enjoyment of power over others. And that inevitably power leads to contempt, the aversion towards the truly devout, the one who truly believes. They feel uncomfortable about near him. A profound dislike now. It's almost kind of as if they see it as something personal. Aversion to the truly devout. 6, persecution. Persecution in the sense of putting him down, just want him to. It begins sort of a hatred thing, and ultimately sacrilege, hatred. He says, until it ends in the murder of the just, figuratively speaking. And sometimes believing to serve God. In the final stage, Castellani says, is when the false believer comes to hate the true believer. Not the atheist. He's never going to hate the atheist. But the true priest, the true believer, because he cannot bear to see faith alive in another. The worst Pharisee is not the unbeliever, he says, but the one who hates the believer. Castellani knew this danger from within. He himself was silenced and exiled by the Jesuit order, a prophet by the new Jesuits, a prophet rejected by the very institution he loved. Of course, he never ceased to believe himself. He has wonderful books, and that is why I'm going to do more videos on him. Another quote from him: "The Pharisee lives in all of us." The Pharisee, he is the worm of the religious soul. The worm of the religious soul. But his message was not of condemnation, but a call to purification. To keep faith alive, we must keep it humble, stripped of power, of vanity, of self-importance. I'm trying to find some more quotes here. The Pharisee is the believer who has lost the love of God and kept only the shell of religion. Let me see a few more. The staircase. Phariseism is the corruption of true religion, not its denial, but its caricature. Yes, I'll summarize it then for you. First, religion becomes an exhibition, faith as performance. Second, it turns into a routine, habit without a soul. Third, it becomes a profession, a career, a livelihood. Fourth, it becomes power, the means to dominate others. Then comes contempt, aversion for the truly devout. Then comes persecution. The institution turns on believers. And then sacrilege and hatred. The false believer destroys the true one. The Pharisee lives in all of us. He is the worm of the religious soul. So, let me see if I can just a second here. Yes, so I think I have read most of them, but Christ did not come to destroy religion, but to purify it. So Leonardo Castellani, priest, exile, prophet, his words still echo in a church that must never stop purifying itself. So, Christ and the Pharisees, lovely, lovely book, collection of essays and sermons. A warning written not for others, but for each one of us. I will try to cover a little bit more of him, of his writings and all his parables and all his tales, fantastic. And I will... I don't know whether I said this at the very beginning, but I will put them on the members only channel. Okay, that's it. My introduction to Leonardo Castellani. He's becoming one of my favorites. Thank you very much for listening. Bye-bye.